I think you're muted, Rabbi Jacobson. We can't hear you. I think you're muted. Can people hear Rabbi Jacobson?
I cannot. He didn't connect his audio.
I can't hear at all.
We can't hear you, Rabbi Jacobson. We can't hear you.
He can't hear you either, Itzchak. Maybe you want to text him or something.
Yeah.
I can't hear nothing. Could you hear something, somebody?
We hear everybody beside Rabbi Jacobson.
Maybe you want to do like a picture hand gesture that you can't hear. Maybe he'll see you like that.
You guys can hear me? Can you just say yes? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, now we hear you. Now we hear you.
Oh, you didn't hear me till now?
No.
Must have been muted. Okay, I'll start again. Okay, so good morning. I said Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1305 at the bottom.
You know, we couldn't hear you for the first 2 or 3 minutes.
And the Rebbe Rashab is tying together all the knots of the discussion of Vayoram Keren Mashiach.
Rabbi, can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Yes. Yeah.
We couldn't hear you for 30 minutes.
But now you hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm speaking. Yeah. So Vayoram Keren Mashiach, which is the end of the verse of Havai Yechatem Rivov, which was the operative theme discussing the elimination of the negative forces, which is very much part of what we're talking about, of bringing godliness even into the darkest places, even where there's adversity, and transforming that. As he discussed over the last, I'm going back now, a good 20 pages back to the, just summing it all up, back to page 1287, where he went to Ma'ata Yuvan, Mashakasa Avaya Chatem Erivav. And it's not just enough to eliminate the adversity, but it's to transform it, as he makes it very clear. And transforming it is hinted to in the words Vayoram Keren Mashiach, and he explained why, because Vayoram Keren Mashiach is referring to Malchus, which is Keren, which is like the key thing he was talking about till now, at the bottom of page 1299. So it's Malchus, Keren Mashiach, the essence of Malchus going up all the way to the Helam Atzmi and drawing down from a place that's even higher than all revelation. And that's the place that has the power to transform even concealment and darkness to light. But then, and explain a bit of what that meant on page 1300 and 1301. And then continued on the bottom of page 1301 that Keren has 4 meanings. And he went on to explain with the 4th meaning, Keren, from the word Keren Zovius, a corner point that on its own has no space. It only joins together 2 walls. That's Malchus that joins together Atzilus and Biyah. And in the process, it actually reveals something that's even higher than Atzilus and Biyah. Like he said, that is the connection of 2 things. The Mamutza comes from a higher place. And what is that higher place? Radla, Malchus of Ein Sof, all the way the Helam Atzmi that he's been referring to. And that's what Malchus does. The bittul of Malchus, therefore, enters and is able to transform, like he said, V'yisem lizgula mekola amim shal pnei ha'adama. And this is what Yonason said to David. Then he said to him, V'shalashta tered ma'ed, Malchus of Atzilus, which is David, goes down 3 days, 3 levels, down, very deeply down into Bimavara Berurim, But in the process, it ultimately will create a sgula, which is the shalosh nekudis of segel, that comes from the elevation and from the refinement of the negative midas of chesed and gvura, of Esav and Yishmael, of the negative form of it, to turn it into kedusha through the bittul, which is the third dot of the segel, to the point that actually the dot elevates all the way to a dot being above the 2 points, because it's rooted even in a higher place, like he said in Primius Atik, as he explained. So that all is indicated in the word Keren. And finally, he brought also from Yenisson's final statement where he said that I will shoot 3 arrows, that those 3 arrows indicate in the air, indicate in the other Maimorim that I cited from the Tzemach Tzedek is like the Asus Deleil that comes after the Asus Latata, that indicates on the level, the 3 that are the Keshes, the rainbow, which is also a form of transformation. The Keshes also indicates Avedas HaBerurim, and that will be Megala Primius Atik, like he said, from the highest levels, and that comes dafka specifically from the transformation of the darkness. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going back to explain now the other 3 meanings in the word Keren. Remember, Keren also comes from the word light, like Keren Oir Panov, Kirun Oir, the shining light on the face of Moshe Rabbeinu after the Luchas Achrenis, which comes from after the sin, and it also comes from the word Etzem and from the word Chezek, Tekef. She's now going to explain how all those interpretations all fit in to this point of Malchus reaching this level of Keren. So after explaining Idea Keren the B'chinas Malchus, I'm looking at the bottom of page 1305 now. Idea Keren the B'chinas Malchus, I'm Mechaberes Nevroim im Elikus, that it connects it connects the Nevroim, the creations, with Elikus through Ayin and Bittel. So there's the connection. That Malchus, which connects these two through its work and its elevation through the Berurim, that causes the Gilui, this higher Gilui of that comes from Keren, from Lashon Oyer. Yeah. Which is even higher than Atzilus and even higher than the root of Atzilus, the Klolos, in Enesav before the Tzimtzum, because it's coming from the Helama the Ein Sof. That's where we stopped learning. So I'm going to continue from there. As I said, the Rebbe Rashab is now tying it all together. So what does he say? So now comes the third. So we already did the corner point Keren Zovis, Keren from the word Keren Oir, and now V'zeu Keren Hamoira al Atzmus Hadover. If you remember, down on page, at the end of page 1301, he said clearly, it's also Beis, the second interpretation, he says, Etzem. Hainu Atzmus Hadover be'etzem hayem hazeh. He brings from the Rashba. So like Etzem is an essential thing. That's why also Keren is like a horn, a bone, which is a solid Etzem. So he says, this is also V'zeu Keren Moira al Atzmus Hadover, and also the first interpretation from the word Chezek. V'gam Lashon Chezek, also from the word strength and power. So if you look at bottom of page 1301, he brought those 2 interpretations first. So he's actually working his way backwards. He started with the corner point, which was the 4th interpretation, went to light, this 3rd interpretation, Etzem and Chezek. So now he says this is also the connection, that is both an Etzem, the core thing, and it's a Chezek shezo tagberes ha'atzmis lias b'bchinas Malchus. That it's referring to the takberes ha'atzmus, the intensity that comes, like he said before, if you remember the takberes ha'atzmus, he talked about gvura. He spoke about the gvura of Kedusha, that it's an essential type of intensity that will all be in the level of Malchus. Because Malchus, as we said, is the level of Keren, so therefore all 4 interpretations all associate with this power that comes from this corner point, that Malchus connects, and Malchus bringing the bittul of Ayin even into the world of the Yesh of creations, that brings the light and it brings the intensity. The B'chinas Malchus.
In this context, is the word chosek
V'yisnaya
the same?
la'alma. Let me finish, and then I'll take questions. V'yisnaya la'alma, and this will radiate in the world. And he's quoting now back to the Zohar, where the Zohar talked about the keshes, about the rainbow. So he says like this: V'yisnaya la'alma. If you remember, before he brought from Zohar 72b, that Mashiach will come. That the Mashiach won't come till they'll see a keshes, and that will shine begavne nehirin, with the lights of its colors. V'yisnaya la'alma. So he goes now, V'yisnaya la'alma b'tchias ha'mesim. And that will radiate in the world. In tchias ha'mesim, because as we learned earlier, what tchias ha'mesim happens? He says clearly, Sha'yesh ha'gashmi yiyeh lakus mamish. That the yesh gashmi, the physical yesh, will be godliness. Like we learned that Malchus, the yesh, that creates the yesh, that Malchus will elevate all the way to the highest level. And that's when the guf will actually feed and nourish the soul, if you recall. So he says the Gashmi will be alakus mamish v'b'chinas gilir er. Today, the yesh Gashmi is a concealed state, and it's a recipient of anything. But then it will be la'alma b'tchias ha'mesim, that will be when the yesh itself will radiate with er. He didn't mention yet that it nourishes the soul. I just mentioned it to refer to what we learned earlier. So that is now v'yisnai la'alma v'zeu v'yorem keren mishiche, and this is the meaning of a yorem keren mishiche, that the keren of Mashiach will be elevated. What does that mean? The b'chinas keren the Malchus, that the level of keren of Malchus is keren she'eses hayesh mamish, that causes the Malchus that goes down below. Remember, is the mechaber, connects that the yesh. So on one hand, it creates the yesh, because Malchus is a concealed state, and therefore it conceals the divine when it creates the yesh. But the second role of Malchus is also to elevate the yesh, like we spoke about David HaMelech, like he spoke at the end, the bottom of page 1303. Ikeres Chabrus is Malmata L'mayel, that Malchus should cause a bittul in the yesh. So he says like this. So Malchus she'eses yesh mamish b'chinas ayin u bittul mamish. So this Keren of Malchus, that now, through the hard work of transforming a yesh of substance, an ego, a self-contained entity, into being sublimated and committed and dedicated to godliness, yeh b'chinas reimamus Keren. It won't no longer just be the Keren level, it'll be ve'yorem Keren Mashiach. Ve'yorem means an elevation, a reimamus, a exaltation, a higher level. Shiur b'zeh dafka hamshachas ha'atzmus. Dafka in this will be the hamshachas ha'atzmus, which is higher than all the levels. So vayorim keren mishiche, and he brings proof to this. So my rama kadni, my crown, my kadni, or kadni could be my light. I mean, keren, all the different meanings will be elevated. Omer Razal Megillah Daf Yudal Omer Aleph. The Gemara says in Megillah 14a, David is Shleima. It's referring to David and Shleima, the kings. David and Shleima.
Lomakan is Tfilas Chano, also. Same Vayolam Kan Mishichoi.
Okay. So it's referring to David with Shleima, King David and King Shleima. Shanim Shechu B'Keren, they were anointed with a Keren. You could be anointed with a pach. A pach is like a small crucible, and a Keren they use like the horn of a shofar. So Nimshecha Malchusam, their Malchus did not. Shaul was anointed with a pach. So his kingship, his kingdom did not last. He was the only king. His children did not inherit it. By David and Shleima, it says that they're because they were Bekeren, because Keren has a permanence to it. Like he said, a Atzmus, a Nitzchias, a Chayzik. So Nimshecha Malchusam, their kingship and kingdom lasted for their children and grandchildren and so on, until Mashiach, who's from Beis David. That says the word in Megillah. David Avdi, Shahoya, B'chinas Habitl Be'etzem. So I'm going to read a few more lines and then we'll stop for questions. So he's now explaining, David remembers Malchus. So he's in a state, the next page, 1306, he's in a state of bittul be'etzem, fundamental selflessness. He personified bittul, like it says, which means that he did not have any shivya. He did not feel any value of a demamti, and I was silenced, like demamti bechinas demim. Like he stood like a stone. That's what he says about himself, which is one of the proofs where David is expressing his complete, utter selflessness. And like we explained earlier, that's the bittul of asiyah, where he said doimim, if you remember, Evan ha'ezel, he said the Evan is Malchus of asiyah. So this is referring to a level of complete, utter selflessness. And the same with Shleima, v'chein Shleima, melech shal shalom shaloi. Melech, who by him it reigned peace, his life was peace, shalom, shemechaber biyah im atzilus. That even in this world of biyah, he was mechaber biyah and atzilus. So he's also Shleima HaMelech, Malchus, so he's referring back to Teira Eir that he quoted earlier. He quoted it before on page, right here, where was it, on page?
Not Shleima HaMelech, but Shleima, Shalom Shaloi. Shaul was also Shaul HaMelech.
We're talking about Shleima HaMelech here. Shleima, Melech Shalom Shaloi. Why are you saying Shaul?
No, not because Shleima HaMelech, because Shleima, Shalom Shaloi. That's a bittul.
But it's because he's the level of Malchus. He's trying to compare Shleima to David. Let me finish explaining it all, then we could all comment and ask questions, okay? Shleima and David both are the level of Malchus. That's what he says before. The level of Malchus that comes with Keren. First, David is the level of utter bittul. Shleima is also Shalom Shleish Mechaber B'Yam and Atzilus. In the Maimed Seneren, he explains it. I quoted before. He quoted before Seneren.
The prior reference is on 103, on the 7th line of the first whole paragraph.
Okay. On 1303. And then he mentioned it again a second time afterwards, I believe. Yeah. So that's the Maimer. So therefore, since they were both this level, that connected to the level of Keren, and they were anointed with a Keren, with a horn, that's why their Malchus can extended bligvul forever. David Melech Yisrael Chai v'Kayim, like we say, David Melech Yisrael, King of Israel, Chai, lives on v'Kayim and sustained and perpetuates forever. Malchus Beis David le'elam, that the Malchus of the house of David will be forever. U'kamei shekosov ad David higdil. This goes back to Yehenison in the Haftarah in the Shmuel Aleph. Ad David higdil, to the point that David will reach greatness. B'bchinas Atzmus ein sof, in the level of Atzmus ein sof, sheyeh b'chinas Malchus b'chinas Gili mamish. That's the elevation of Malchus all the way to the highest levels, and it will be in Begili Mamish. So it begins first with David going down the Teirad Ma'oid. Malchus goes down into Biyah and is concealed, as Yenison told David, and concealed all the way into Biyah to the lowest levels, Evan Ezel, all the way to the level of Evan, and so on, where the Birurim, when you're refining the lowest of worlds, that's what David HaMelech did. But then that will lead to Vehisam Lizgula, that will lead to the Segel, the Bittel, will ultimately elevate. Beina Amim, Mina Amim, Azlinan Minei. From there it will come Evana Ezel, they'll elevate, the Malchus will be elevated all the way, firstly to Radla, to Primius Atik, all the way to the Helam Atzmi, all the way to Atzmus Ein Sof, like he's saying here. And that will be La'asad Lave, when it will be seen in the fullest glory, in the fullest revealed way. So this is how the Rebbe Rashab now ties together all the four interpretations of Keren, the connection to David and to Shleima, and the Gili of what he spoke earlier, that though Malchus is the lowest of the spheres, it's rooted in the highest levels. And that's the transformation that he's going to now finish this paragraph, the transformation of darkness into light. But before I continue with the real conclusion, where he's going to tie it all together, we'll stop here if anybody has any questions.
At David Higdil, it said at the end that Yenison and David cry very bad, Ad David Higdil, he cried more. And
Yeah, but Chassidus teaches Higdil
Higdil,
also from the
Yeah.
word godless.
yeah, the beetle. And also what you said about, I understand now more the Segol and the Segoil Torah, and why the roofing gets Segoil, because the Nekudo, that is beetle, that was on there, is reaching above. The Nekudo, Tachtana, is reaching above. And one more thing, by Shlomo it said Melech Shalom Shaloi, not because it's called Melech, it's because Melech Shalom Shaloi, Mechaber Dia Emetzius.
I disagree with that, actually.
Why
But-
Shalom
but
is
fine.
also called Shalom Melech.
It's not about, but called a Melch, we're talking about the level of Malchus, Keren. But Shaul was a level of Bina. If you learn the Mimer of Mini Melech, he explains that there. And if you look in Senereno, he says it also clear. Shlomo and David are the level of Malchus. What he's bringing about Shalom Shaloi, because he wants to show how Shlomo also is Mechaber, Biyah and Atzilus, just like David does. That's why he's bringing Shalom Shaloi, that even in this world, he brought Shalom to this world. Not just in David's time, there wasn't Shalom. But okay, fine.
I have a question about this level, this first definition of Keren, which is Lashon Chozek, Shu Tagboros Atzmus. First of all, Chozek is the same in this context. Chozek is the same thing as this Tagboros Atzmus, some intensification or strengthening. Yes.
Chayzik means strength, yeah, and intensity, like he said at the bottom of page 1301, yeah.
1205, yeah. Yeah, but it's also 1305. My question is, what does that mean, Mamish? When Malchus is strengthening, like there's more bittul? Like what does that mean in practical terms?
That Malchus has an infinite amount of strength because it's coming from this highest levels. That's higher than the strength of the other spheres.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
But if it is strengthening, if it's giving strengthening and elevating Malchus, and because you just, as you just said, that it's rooted higher, so it has more strength. But if it's also at the same time Tachas a Bittel, it doesn't have anything of its own. How is it strengthening the Tesha, the Tes Sphirot that are within it? How is it strengthening? Where's that power coming
Where does it
from?
say that he's strengthening the test spheres within it? Where do you see that expression?
I thought, well, that's what we were just saying about the Malchus elevates with Tachboros Chozek.
Well, it doesn't say that. And Malchus itself, due to the fact that we've talked about this extensively. Malchus, on one hand, Les Lamagar Malklum, has nothing of its own. It's utter bittul. And in that sense, it's the lowest of the levels in Giluyim. But on the level of Etzem, Malchus is rooted in a place that's higher than Giluyim. And that will be revealed through the Avodah, Malchus going down to this world and sublimating this yesh of this world. That work will reveal in Malchus its intensity and its etzem and the light. All the three interpretations of Keren will be revealed in Malchus, and that will be revealed when Mashiach comes. That's what he's saying.
That's good, and I can understand that part. But and when you're saying that it doesn't say that it will then thereby also elevate the other 9 spheros at the same time.
You don't see that. I've not seen that inside anywhere here. It happens to be correct, but it's not what he's saying here. It's always that way. That when Mashiach comes, everything will be elevated. All the Giluyim will also be elevated. You need everything. I've spoken a number of times that you need to have Oyer and you need to have Keli. You need Oyer and Yesh. You need the 9 spheres and you need Malchus. They each play a critical role. None of them are superfluous. None of them are extra. They each play a different role. Malchus is, in this context, like when you say the Yesh of this world, if it doesn't have Oyer and Torah and mitzvahs that guides it, even though the Yesh is rooted in Atzmus, but it will never be revealed. The Yesh also can go off on its own track and completely defy God. where the higher spheres don't do that. So basically, you always need both. He's talking here about the transformation of the lowest, which is ultimately the Yesh, but also Malchus, which is the divine, as I explained the other day, is the lowest of the spheres that descends below, but then will be elevated. It's like the moon. The moon is lower than the sun, less light, to the point that it completely disappears. But then in the future, the moon will elevate and become even greater than the sun. This is a central theme that we've been discussing at length. So I think you have to just go back to the basic points of there is that you need both. Which is higher, the body or the soul? You know, some places the soul is far higher than the body. And yet there's something in the body that comes from koyach Atzmus. So you need to take both. Tachtainim is the lowest of worlds, but it comes from the highest of places. Right? You never say it's not Tachtainim, it's still the lowest. It's lower than Atzilus and Bri Yitzira. But that's where the Eibishter has a desire. And there's something, the Tachtainim of the Yesh of this world is rooted in Etzem. That's not a contradiction to the other worlds all being higher. You just need both. I mean, is Moshe Rabbeinu higher, or is the simple Jew that doesn't have any knowledge and has no Ava V'yira higher? Obviously, Moshe is higher. But when you talk about a certain Atzmis, there's an Atzmis even in the Ish Poshet. But that needs to be revealed. That's revealed through all the work we're talking about.
I have a question. You keep saying la silabo, and I think I asked this in the last class, almost like it's binary, but it seems like it's the process of birurim. And through the process of our avoda and our birurim, we bring Yemos Mashiach. But this idea of
that's correct. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And then when you bring Moshe Mashiach, you reveal the Atzmius and the Helema Atzmi and all that we've been learning about.
But it's a process. We're actually bringing. If you have a Mashiach mentality,
it's a process that's lasting already for 5,782 years, just to be exact.
Yes, I hear you.
So of course it's a process, yeah.
But you could say that the world theoretically should have more Gilui of the Helem than 5,000 years ago. It's a process. It's not like overnight. Dark.
If you read the Rebbe's Sichos, he talks about the fall of communism. He talks about technology. Talks about the freedoms we have today. Those are all a testimony to the refinement of this world. That once upon a time we didn't have any of these benefits. Okay. Sitting here and learning Ayin Beis without anyone coming to arrest us should not be taken for granted. That was my whole talk about apathy. So all the blessings of life are a result of the work that we've done. Now, we still don't have Mashiach and Geula in the full sense of the word. You know, there's still, it's not a state where Ruach HaTuma Avim in the earth, that all the pollutants and toxins have been removed from this world. There's still plenty of pain and oppression and war and blood and innocent people being hurt. So we're not there yet, but we are, in the Rebbe's words, at the threshold. And there are many, many signs where you could see it.
Like you said, last night you said, beautiful, Gimel Klippus at Meir's. Today, most of the nations are not in this category.
That's right. That's right.
That's a big thing that you said. And Bechlal, you said Gimel Klippus at Meir's, the Eish Mesakachat Ansor, they are not, they themselves are not mayors. The Gil is becoming mayors. Right? You said something like that.
Yeah, that's a letter straight from a letter from the Frierdiker Rebbe. Yeah, he says, Chaz v'shalom, Merkava is a Merkava d'Kedusha. Yeah.
Did I hear you, Rabbi Teitel, say that Rabbi Jacobson said last night that the majority of nations of the world are not from Gimel Klippus at Tameis?
Yeah, he said they are category.
It's not the first time I said it.
I know, that's interesting though, right? I mean, Tanya, you know, I know you've talked about it, that line there, how we can understand it, Lukamehu, but that's an interesting statement. Is that your statement or from the Rebbe, our Rebbe?
I understand it from the Rebbe.
You understand it from the Rebbe.
How could the Rebbe say with that Mashiach is right are there if all the nations of the world are Shalosh Klippus Atmeis? It wouldn't be possible naturally. It just doesn't make any sense. And secondly, the Alter Rebbe himself said that he's not referring to Chassidus U'Misa'elam, to the righteous.
Right. That's how I've always understood it, that we don't know who they are. There's plenty of them, but not all, the vast majority. You're saying the vast majority are Chassidei Umas Ha'olam?
You'd have to say that if the Rebbe is saying that when the Rebbe spoke about Sheva Mitzvah B'nai, did he say which nations we shouldn't reach out to? Did he exclude anybody?
No.
Why not?
Because I always thought that since we don't know who that is, we gotta use a.
No, but the Rebbe said you couldn't do that. You couldn't do that 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It means, my understanding is that all the nations are more or less there, just like we talk about Jews. Teneke shenishbu. Not all Jews are observant, they're all ignorant, not in the category of evil. That's how I understand the Rebbe looking at the world today.
It also gives us an explanation.
There's no way you could say the hundreds of sikhs that everybody talks about, that the Rebbe said, all you have to do is open your eyes, the world is ready, the Berurim are finished. How can you justify that if all the nations of the world are Shalosh Klipos HaTmeis? All those sikhs make no sense then.
And also the Mivtza Shiva Mitzvah Bnei Noach. It's a mitzvah to the whole entire world.
Precisely. So you could say they may not be actually Chasidim U'Salem, potentially, but however you explain it. I always refer to page 230 in volume 13 of Likutei Sichos. Did any of you ever study it or even look it up?
Yeah, I did.
So there you go. Read through those. The Rambam says, Lo Yeshevet Levi Bilvad.
Page 230, volume 13.
230 in volume 13. The Rambam says, Lo Shevet Levi Bilvad, not Shevet Levi alone, Ela Kol Ish V'ish Meboy Ela. All people of the world, which the Rebbe says clearly means not the nations, if they choose. Meboy Elam, as they stated. Yeah. That's the Lashon of the Rambam. That's the time of the Rambam, 1,000 years ago, where for sure most nations of the world were not exactly on that level. Anyway, read those notes. To me, it's very clear from all the sikhs of the Rebbe. I agree, most Chabad are not aware of this and probably wouldn't even agree with what I just said. But then they would have to behoove them to explain how the Rebbe could say the world is ready. All you have to do is open your eyes. If indeed 8 billion people of this planet, let's just say even 50% are Shalosh Klipos HaTmeis, there's no way but derech hateva that you could say the world is ready. They're not ready. They're Nazis. Or they're Ra, Ayin Beis Tev Klal. How could you explain the Rebbe's Sichos that way? Anyway, I have many things to say on this. I thought I spoke about it many times, and I thought I explained it, at least my understanding.
This is a major.
I know.
Now it makes it even more strong than last night. Yeah, Navi said that the Hashem will bring Nevuah on Goyim. That gives us a little more understanding.
Look, let's be honest. The reason that most Jews, including Chassidim, find it difficult to accept what I just said, and what I believe the Rebbe says, is because we've been living 2,000 years under oppression. We've developed, I believe, a gene called defense mechanism. And we still think the world is mostly potential Nazis. They're just not acting that way. But most Jews feel that way. I think most Jews feel that the non-Jewish world are mostly, not they're going to say Nazis, but basically, anti-Semites. And therefore find it very difficult to accept the idea that the world is right at the threshold of Geula, as the Rebbe puts it. Put it quite bluntly, I think that is a fundamental issue. That's a Golas mentality. And I think the Rebbe wanted to change that mentality. He didn't say, don't lock your doors. We know there are terrorist attacks happening in Israel. I'm not naive. I didn't say that didn't happen. I'm not saying that we know there's invasions and there's attacks and there is murder and so on. That's not a contradiction, but you still have to explain the Rebbe's sichas then. That's why a lot of people have an issue. They say the Rebbe said, I believe it, but I don't understand it. That's what many people do say. I frankly, I'm not from that school of thought. I think what the Rebbe says makes total sense to me. The fact that there's still people who are criminals, you also have Jews that are criminals. It's not just non-Jews. Come on. You know, I always say this, that all the Jews kept the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, we'd have Mashiach here already. Think about that one. Anyway.
Yesterday about
we actually digressed here. This has nothing to do with this Maimon altogether, except I guess we're talking about Mashiach here. But fine, we came up.
You mentioned that there is no neshomes in Shemeach and Damon. Sometimes he's saying Kiyum v'chayis, sometimes he's saying Kiyum gufom and of them chayis. That's a very interesting thing. To be medayik also, the Kiyum it brings before the chayis, but the Malchus.
This is not my original. This I took from the Mefarshim there, the Rebbe. I mean, there's different, the Rabbi talk about it. I do my homework before I give this class.
How could you explain that the Ruach Sa'ora is not his Kedusha?
Simon, 1 second. We're learning Ayin Beis now. Can we do this later? Because you're dealing now with my Tanya class. It's a different shiur altogether. Not everybody necessarily listen to it. Let me finish the paragraph. You want to talk about that afterwards? We can talk after we finish the recording. How's that? Okay?
That sounds like a good plan.
That's what I would do. It's just being consistent with my general approach. Okay, so let's finish the paragraph and we'll review it all properly. Let me finish and I'll explain. I think I've explained many times, but I think it deserves more explanation. So now he finishes like this. And this is also what it says on the future, meaning when Mashiach comes. And he's literally going back, by the way, to the beginning of volume 3, page 1208. So he's tying it all together now, and he's saying like this. What does it say about the Asid? The night will shine like the day. It's a statement. In other words, it won't just have a moon in the sky and there'll be some light. The light will be compared to day. The Laila shuz mana cheshech, Laila, which is like he says in the Torah, l'cheshech kara Laila. And he called darkness night. That the night, which is the time of darkness, will be in a state of light, like the light of the day. Okay. That means not that you'll have that the light of the sun will also shine at night. If you said that the sun won't set, it'll continue to shine, that's not such a pella. That's a miracle also. But it's not Laila Kayim, it's not that the night itself. He's explaining, why can't you just teach Laila Kayim Yoyer, that today the sun shines only by day, and in the future the sun will shine also by night. He says, number one, it's not such a pella to say that. That's not such a chiddush, so to speak. And also, the pshat hakosov, the literal interpretation of the verse, ein mashmekem, does not appear, does not suggest that. Because the pasuk continues, and also the darkness will not darken. Mimcha. Now he starts like that. That the future, the darkness will not be darkened before you. And then he says, if Laila Kiyom Yoyer simply means that the sun will shine, what is the cheshech layachshech? Mimcha. Which means that the darkness will not be dark before you. That means there's something more going on here than just the sun shining. That the darkness will be like light. So he's not talking about the sun shining so powerfully that also illuminates the dark. That the darkness itself, darkness will no longer be a concealing force. A force that darkens things, that conceals. So this is really the conclusion of this whole point. That we're not like, let me just spell this out. If you may remember when he spoke about Havayu Elikim, Ve'edaita Yem V'Shavesa Levavecha, Ki Havayu Elikim, I want to read a few lines from page the first page of volume 3, the bottom of page 1207. I want to read a few lines. I think it's very important to understand this well. He says like this. He says at the bottom of the page I'm reading. He says when it says Havaya Hu Alakim, the Pirush is like this. That the Tzimtzum will no longer. One second. I just want to catch the right line I want to read. She'ein sof shalifnat Tzimtzum yer begili. That the air will shine the way it is at its core. I'm skipping the parentheses. Havaya will Elikim, that Elikim will no longer conceal Havaya. Havaya will shine through Elikim, through transforming the Tzimtzum, the Shem Elikim, Yagili Shem Havaya Bebeis Madregasana. So basically transforming the Tzimtzum, that will cause that Havaya should shine through Elikim in both ways. But then look at the next line. Ach, Mashakosov Einoid, but then what it says after Havaya Elikim, B'Shamayim Al V'Aretz B'Tochas, then he says Einoid, Hu Shala'acha Gemara Berurim, that when the end, after the finishing of the Berurim, which means the refinements. Yeh Shem Elikim Atzmei. Not Shem Elikim will reveal Havaya. Shem Elikim itself will reveal. For who the Shem Elikim shu b'chinas helam. Elikim, which on its own is a concealer. Yeh b'chinas gili kamei Shem Havaya mamish. Ukamei shekosav alayla kiyem yoyer. The layla b'chinas helam the Shem Elikim. Yeh b'chinas gili mamish. Kiyem the Shem Havaya. And he goes on to explain, so it's not just that it won't conceal and Havaya will shine through, that the sun will shine even through the night of the moon. But that the moon itself, or like he goes on to say, Elikim itself, or Malchus itself, is what he's saying here. The darkness itself will radiate. It's a whole different thing. In other words, the Tzimtzum won't just be a revealer instead of being a concealer. The very fact that God concealed his presence through Golus and through all these years, will that be redeemed? If you remember, I elaborated on this at length. It's not just that we will come to Mashiach and all the darkness that was there is no longer there. The darkness itself that God concealed himself will also reveal God's power, which is the power to conceal. That's also will be Begili. That's what he's saying here. And this, of course, is after this long explanation, all these pages to explain this idea. And then he adds, Umoisif oid. So not only cheshach layachshich, that's one thing. The darkness will not be dark, will not be a force, will not darken. Then he adds, the pasuk goes further, v'layla ki yom yoyer. V'moisif oid shu yoyer k'mo ha'oyer. Because you could say, okay, the darkness won't darken. The darkness will teach us something about God. But who says it'll be exactly like light? The same power of revelation. So he says that's what he adds. It'll also be like Oyer, that it will be mamish like Oyer, which is a far bigger chiddush. Because to say that it reveals God's power to conceal, okay, but it's still a concealing power. But now he's saying that it will shine with the same light, not the same light, a higher light, but it will shine and be as bright and revealing, just as light reveals God's Giluyim, the Cheshach will reveal God's Helama Atzmi, in the same way that light reveals God's revelation. You hear that? That's a pretty interesting paradox, but that's what he says here. V'gam, an additional point, Shadik Siv, because it says, V'lo yeh lecha hashemesh le'er yemim, and the sun will no longer be the source of the light of the day, because Hashem himself will be the light of the day. Now, what makes a daylight is the sun. It says that the Hashem will be the source of light. It's another additional point, that also the daylight will not come from the sun, it will come from God himself. So now he concludes. Remember, he said before that you can't say that it's just the sun shining at night. He gave a few reasons. Firstly, because it's not such a pella, it's not such a wonder. Secondly, it doesn't seem like the pshat in the pasuk, because it says, first, v'gam cheshech le'yachshich. So then when he adds, Laila kiyam yoyer, you have to say it's even more than darkness, not darkening. You have to say that is going to be like it's, or the darkness itself will be light. And now he adds that even the sunlight is also not going to be sunlight in the future. So to say that Laila kiyam yoyer means that the sun will shine at night, he gave three reasons why that is not pshat. So what is pshat? El hakavona.
Where's my cover?
However, the intention is that when it says that the night will shine like day, that the darkness itself will be like light. Can we get everybody to mute? What's going on?
It's Eliezer. He's muted now.
Okay. And so the night, the darkness itself will radiate, will be light. And now he concludes, and when the darkness will be light, it's a light that's even greater than the light of Oyer. So it's not only equal, it's even greater. Now I have to say this. There was a year in, I think, Tavshim Mem Zayin, when this was discussed, and by the Rebbe in Farbrengen, he said that they wrote Laila Kiyem Yer, that the Tzimtzum itself, a Tzimtzum Atzme Yer, that the Tzimtzum itself will be light. The Rebbe said that everybody says that flippantly and easily, but he has yet to have anyone explain to him how is that possible. Because at the end of the day, it's a paradox. Concealment means concealment. You could say that we don't see today that it's God's power to conceal. But when the father conceals himself from the child, so the child should find the father, it's still concealing. It's still it's the divine power to conceal. And yet, it's going further that we're going to that divine power to conceal will shine like light and even greater. So there is definitely a paradoxical element here. But at the end of the day, this is what will happen Lavi. Like I mentioned the letter from the Rebbe to Ben Tzvi, where he says that from a child, I imagine Mashiach coming, and then we will understand why we do acknowledge and thank God for afflicting, for afflicting me. They'll understand all the asurim, all the afflictions and oppressions, all the darkness will be understood how it's really a blessing. So this is something that's not easy for us, our minds, to wrap our head around, but clearly that's what he's coming to say, that that's the ultimate goal. It's not enough. The redemption, the Geula will not just be a reward that's going to be more powerful than all the suffering, that, it was worth all the suffering because look at the reward we get when Mashiach comes. But furthermore, that there'll be a revelation of the very darkness that allowed all that pain to happen, that itself will become a force of revelation. The night itself will become a force of light, and even a greater light than light of revelation. It's similar to what some people in recovery tell you, or maybe even some Baalei Tshuva will say, that even though I went through a lot of suffering, a lot of difficulty, not only was it worth it, I realize now the blessing in it all. That even that which seemed so concealing and so dark and so negative, that it itself became a force that's more powerful than any light that I ever experienced. So it's not that the sun is shining at night, it's that the night itself is shining with its own unique night energy, if you wish. That's essentially what he's saying here.
Are we to take this literally, or more like you just said, spiritually, that there'll be greater meaning, that the darkness itself will reveal the meaning that's currently concealed within it, if you will? Or are we mamish to believe the sun will go away, the light will be the what lights the earth, and there will be no light from the sun? Like literally.
I would say both.
Uh-huh.
First of all, he doesn't say there won't be light from the sun. He says the daylight will not come from the sun. It says in other places the sun will be even brighter. It all depends. The sun will have a different role. That's all. So
it'll be like in the North Pole where it's daytime all the time.
Not exactly necessarily. There's different ways to explain this. Chassidus explains this in different places, what this means. Here, the focus is on the darkness becoming a force of light itself. But the fact of the matter is, regarding the sun, there are places that this is discussed. In Sefer Erchim, in the Encyclopedia of Chassidus, he brings the different explanations of what will be with the sun in the future.
In the pasuk said that the sun
Thank
will.
you.
This is not so relevant here, what the sun will be with the sun. It does say that the moon will be like the sun and the sun will be 7 times stronger. It also says that.
But this is not what he's saying here.
No, because here he's not talking about the sun. Here he wants to talk about the moon or the darkness. If you go back to the beginning of this topic, on page 1208, he talks about it some more. But if you go to Sefer Erchim, if you want all the opinions, you have to go to other Maimorim. This Maimor is not an exhaustive encyclopedia on the sun. It's talking about he wants to talk about Ein Oid. And the sun is part of the discussion, but it's not just talking what will happen with the sun in the future. Now, he may talk about it later. I don't think so, if I recall correctly. But if you look at the places I just referred you to, there's the discussions more at length about what happens with the sun and so on. Also, as I said, back on 1208,
yeah,
he also talks about
fascinating things at the end of the paragraph in 1208. Wow, he's saying this point that you said just now. Very powerful.
Yeah. And then he says, God will remove the sun from its sheath.
He said,
Right. But I'm saying that, right, exactly. Because that's another story about what happens with the sun. Look, at the end of the day, you have to keep this in mind. God is one God. God has 2 tracks. His power to conceal, his power to reveal. When we're dealing with the spheres in general, they are revelation. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Teferes. Oir is the general name for revelation. Helem or Tzimtzum is the name for concealment. So when you say Koiche Lahoyer, Koiche Shalei Lahoyer, Yecholte Lahoyer, Yecholte Shalei, he has the power to radiate and reveal, he has the power not to reveal. So you have to keep in mind, these are all powers of God. Ultimately, in the spheres, Malchus relates more with the power of concealment than with the power of revelation. The 9 spheres are more revelatory. God wants both. That's why there's revelation in this world. If he only created the world with Shem Elikim, the world couldn't exist, like Rashi says in the beginning. Midas Hadin. So you need Shittif Imay Midas Harachim. You need a tzimtzum, but then you need a kav. So there's always going to be a mix of light and darkness, concealment and revelation. The world in which we live right now has revelation, is all the blessings in life. The fact that there's a world out there that we have air to breathe and food to eat, these are giluyim. On the other hand, godliness is very much concealed in this world. We can deny God's existence. Like he says in Tanya, tachtenim. To the point, Aniva Afse'ed, we can declare me and nothing else. It's all about me. So we have all these elements. Chassidus wants to explain that all this will be elevated and redeemed. The reason there's a concealment is in order for us to reveal the divine. That's called Avodas HaBerurim. That's what we do in the weekdays. We try to reveal the divine in a concealed world. All this will come to a fruition and conclusion where the Giluyim will shine, but also the darkness, the concealment will also shine. That doesn't take away that the Giluyim of Chachma Bina Das will continue to be here. It's not just we'll only have Malchus and only the Helem. You'll have them both. So the sun represents Gilui, the Levana represents somewhat Helem. It's also like Malchus. And then comes the process of how each of them will come to their total glory, la'osed love. And it all comes to explain actually the realities of our life, the giluyim in our life and the helamis in our life. And we have them both. So I think you got to think of it more practically as opposed to mechanically, like I always point out, and it'll be easier to understand.
He's saying as the Malchus will be Oyer Niflo V'Nale B'Yeser Shekol HaSfira Shemchinas Gilu Yekablu V'Chinas HaMalchus. It's not going to accept from the Shemesh, but from, like you said now, in Reish Ches, he's saying very powerful things.
Yeah, I told you, this is the conclusion from Reish Ches.
He said, this is Ein Oid.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions?
Your comment they were talking about earlier that the Umas Olam are becoming not Glimmer, that would be could be a sign of what you're saying about what here, what the Rebbe is saying is that Choshech, which was Gimel Klimas Demeas, is going to be actually a source of light. So maybe that we see that in the transformation of the Gimel, the Umas Olam are already being transformed as into source of light itself, rather than a concealment.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. But remember, Choshech refers to all levels of Choshech. Yeah. Okay, so then we'll stop here. Let's stop here at the end of the paragraph on